Okay, so ready to dive into this anger management handbook you sent over.
Absolutely. Let's unpack it.
It's called Anger Management Best Practice Handbook, Controlling Anger Before It Controls You.
Okay.
And we're going to really get into it, Like, what is anger? What makes us so mad? And how do we actually, manage it so it doesn't manage us?
Yeah, and it's interesting, when you think about how much our understanding of anger has actually changed, even just over the last few centuries.
Really? Like, how so?
Well, so it wasn't really until the 18th century that Western society started to see anger within a family, especially towards a spouse or children, as a real problem.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like, back in the day, you could get accused of witchcraft just for having a temper. Wild.
Right. It really puts things in perspective. Like what we consider acceptable ways to express anger are totally shaped by the times we live in.
Yeah, totally.
But the book defines anger as a strong feeling of displeasure or hostility.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. But there's this quote by Benjamin Franklin that I thought was interesting. He said, "Anger is never without a reason, but seldom with a good one."
Oh, I like that.
Right.
It's true, though, because it's like there's always something underneath that anger, even if it doesn't make sense on the surface.
Yeah, totally.
So the book gets into, the science of anger and how when we get mad, our sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive. Like adrenaline and cortisol just flood your system.
Yeah.
It's basically the same thing that happened to our ancestors when they were, facing down a wild animal.
Yeah, the good old fight or flight response, right?
Exactly. Except these days, it's probably not a saber-toothed tiger, more like a stressful email or rush hour traffic.
Right, exactly. And all those hormones that were helpful for survival back then are actually more likely to cause health problems now, like heart disease.
So basically, our bodies haven't quite caught up to the fact that we're not living in the Stone Age anymore.
Pretty much.
That's kind of funny when you think about it.
Hey!
But it makes sense, though, when you think about how bad stress is for you in the long run. One thing I found helpful is how the book breaks down anger triggers into two main types, internal and external. So internal triggers are those things we create in our own minds, like maybe replaying that awkward conversation you had last week over and over. And then external triggers are more about what's happening around us, like, a traffic jam or a disagreement with a coworker, stuff like that.
And that's a really key point because while you can't always control the car in front of you slamming on its brakes, you can definitely learn to control how you react to it.
Yeah, and that's where the whole anger management thing comes in, right?
Exactly.
And this is where the handbook gets really practical because it actually gives you steps you can take to get that control back. One technique that stood out to me was the whole cool down thing. Have you ever tried that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Even if it's just for a few minutes, taking a step back from a heated situation can totally change things.
It's like hitting the pause button before things escalate.
Right. And during that pause, that's when you can use those healthier coping skills the book talks about, like deep breathing, meditation, even just changing your environment a little bit can really help.
It's about going from reacting without thinking to responding in a more thoughtful way,
Exactly.
which I'm guessing takes practice.
It definitely does.
One thing I thought was interesting was that section on positive visualization. Have you ever tried that?
Yeah, definitely. It might sound a little weird, but it really works. Like instead of focusing on how long the line is at the grocery store, you can imagine you're on a beach somewhere.
It's like a mini vacation for your mind to kind of interrupt those negative thoughts and replace them with something more positive.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the book isn't just about these external techniques, though, right? There's a lot about self-awareness, too.
Oh, absolutely. Self-awareness is key. It's like, those warning lights on your car's dashboard?
Yeah.
They're there to tell you something's up before the engine blows up, right?
Okay.
It's kind of the same with those physical signs you get when you're angry, like your jaw clenching, heart racing. Those are like your warning signs. And learning to spot them early on can help you hit the brakes before you do or say something you regret.
Totally. It's so easy to just react in the heat of the moment and then,
Exactly. And speaking of reactions, the book talks about how bad it is to just bottle up your anger.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about that. That can't be good, right? Isn't that, more unhealthy?
It is. It's like imagine trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
You're going to get splashed.
Exactly. It takes a ton of energy, and eventually it's going to pop up.
And probably not in a good way.
Exactly. And that's when you start to see those, unhealthy coping mechanisms, people lashing out, or even just getting physical symptoms like headaches and stuff.
It's a good reminder that we need to find healthy ways to actually express anger.
Absolutely.
And the book actually gives some good advice for that, too.
It does.
I was struck by that section on communication styles. Especially that part about using I feel statements instead of blaming language, like you always.
It's crazy how much of a difference that one little shift in language can make.
I know,
Yeah.
it's huge. Because instead of pointing fingers, you're taking responsibility for your own feelings, which is way more constructive.
Exactly. Like instead of saying you're always late, you could say I feel disrespected when you're late.
Yeah. See, that
Ah.
just sounds so much better.
It's night and day, right?
Totally.
And the book also talks about actually writing a letter to the person you're angry with.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to actually send it, but as like a way to process your emotions.
Oh, that's interesting. Have you ever tried that?
Oh, yeah. It can be really helpful, actually, because it gives you that safe space to work through all those raw emotions without the pressure of a face-to-face.
I bet. And sometimes maybe you realize the situation isn't as straightforward as you originally thought, you know?
Exactly. You start to see their side of things, or maybe you realize you played a part in it too.
Totally. That kind of self-reflection is so important.
It really is, because honestly, anger is usually a symptom of something deeper going on, like maybe an unmet need or something from the past that hasn't been dealt with.
So it's about looking beyond that initial anger to figure out what's really going on underneath it.
Exactly. And the book talks about how important forgiveness is in this process.
Forgiving the other person.
Well, yes, but also forgiving yourself.
Oh, that's so true.
Like for the mistakes you've made, the times you didn't handle your anger as well as you could have. We've all been there.
I know. And holding on to that anger, whether it's towards yourself or someone else, it just keeps you stuck, you know?
It does. It really does. And forgiveness, it's not about saying what happened was okay.
Yeah.
It's about letting go of those negative emotions so you can actually move on.
It's about choosing peace over resentment, which is easier said than done sometimes.
So true. But this book makes it clear that it's a process. Like anything worth doing, it takes time and practice. It really is a journey, isn't it?
It is. But you know what I liked about this handbook?
What's that?
It's like, it talks about a really complex topic, but it never feels overwhelming, you know?
Right.
It's like having a friend who gets it, you know, and who actually wants to help you deal with all the tough stuff.
Yes. And it actually gives you concrete stuff you can try. It's not just theory.
Totally. Like, remember that exercise about identifying your anger triggers?
Yeah.
That was huge for me. I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is actually making sense now.
Just knowing what your triggers are like, what those situations or people are that really set you off, that's a game changer.
Yeah, it's like you can finally start to get ahead of it instead of always feeling like you're playing catch up.
Exactly.
And speaking of practical tips, that whole section on relaxation techniques was really good.
Oh, yeah. That's so important.
Like deep breathing, meditation, even that thing, progressive muscle relaxation. Have you heard of that?
Yes. It sounds kind of strange, but it really works. You're basically like tensing and then releasing different muscle groups, and it helps to reset all that physical tension that builds up with anger and stress.
It's like giving your body permission to just chill out, which we all need sometimes,
Right.
for sure. The book talks about how these techniques are like muscles. The more you use them, the stronger they get.
Exactly. It's about building that emotional resilience, you
Yeah.
know, so you're more equipped to deal with challenges without losing it.
Exactly. It's about making that choice to respond thoughtfully instead of just like flying off the handle.
Yes. And feeling that sense of control can be really powerful.
It can, definitely.
You know, another thing I really liked about the book?
Yeah.
The emphasis on self-care.
Oh, that's so important.
Because it's not selfish to take care of yourself.
That's not. It's essential.
It really is. And self-care means different things to different people. Like for some people, it might be a walk in nature or a hot bath or even just having some quiet time alone.
Totally. It's about figuring out what works for you and then actually making time for it.
Exactly. Because when we're burnt out, everything feels harder. Even little things can seem like huge problems.
That's so true. I know this handbook is packed with good stuff, insights and strategies for dealing with anger, but at the end of the day, it's about what you do with it, right?
100%. It's up to us to actually put these ideas into practice in our own lives, you know?
Exactly. It's about really making an effort to build healthier habits so we can have more peace in our lives.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into anger management, I'm curious, what's one thing that really stuck with you from this handbook, something you're going to try to implement in your own life?
Ooh, that's a good one. You know, for me, I think it's that idea that anger is often like a messenger.
Ooh, I like that.
It's trying to tell you something about your needs, maybe your boundaries, or even just something that's been bothering you that you haven't dealt with yet.
It's a good way to look at it.
So instead of just trying to ignore it or push it down, I'm going to try to be more curious about it, you know? listen to what it's trying to tell me.
I love that. That's really insightful. For me, I think the biggest takeaway is about self-compassion.
Yeah.
Managing anger, it's a process, right?
Definitely.
It's not going to be perfect. So I'm going to celebrate those little victories and be kind to myself when I mess up, because every day is a new chance to try again and keep learning and growing. So as you go about your day, we encourage you to think about your own relationship with anger. What are your triggers? What helps you find your calm? And how can you approach this powerful emotion with more understanding and compassion?